On behalf of the Lutheran World Federation, Islamic Relief Worldwide, and HIAS, I'd like to welcome you to this online event on welcoming the stranger, living as neighbors, strengthening meaningful collaboration in refugee response, and building inclusive societies. I'm Reverend Dr. Sivin Kit, the Program Executive for Public Theology and Interreligious Relations from the LWF. We know that today is a very blessed Friday, and it's a blessed time where it's the first Friday after Ramadan has started, and also 1 week before Good Friday and Passover, where Christians and Jews would be celebrating important festivals. I'd like to invite my good friend, Muhammad Al-Sanusi, to join us right now. And he's the Executive Director for the Network for Religious and Traditional Peacemakers. And he's going to give us some opening remarks to just prepare us so that our hearts are ready for the very meaningful conversation that we'll look forward to hear afterwards. So, Muhammad, over to you.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Sivin. I really appreciate your kind introduction here, and good morning and good afternoon and Ramadan Mubarak to those of you who are celebrating the holy month of Ramadan. And Dr. Sivin already mentioned these critical high holidays for all our traditions. I just want to begin by really say that as we enter this holy month of Easter, Ramadan, Passover, Nafartari, and Faiska, our brothers and sisters are and will partake in celebrations to honor their faith traditions. We recognize many of these faith celebrations have communalities, such as how these high holidays serve as a time for spiritual growth and community service. Over the past several years, these high holidays fall under circumstances impacting, nearly everyone, in the world. And members of society have impacted quite a bit, and such as COVID-19 pandemic and it is second order impacts. This year we all have the Ukraine crisis at the forefront of our minds. In such tumultuous times, we turn to our faith to help navigate us through the nuances of troubles and providing guidance on how to support our neighbors in their times of need. When we were exploring the idea of welcoming the stranger, we could have never envisioned that this initiative would come in the midst of worst refugee crisis since World War II unfolding in Europe, with its repercussions felt around the world, including food insecurity in the global south. The concept of welcoming the stranger is ever more crucial. Faith-inspired action with an inclusive and contextual theological vision and values can make an impact on the ground with local communities. So the act of welcoming the stranger, as the title suggests, is a first step to envision and support an inclusive society where we can all live together as a community. We need to support spaces for active dialogue to support in moving refugees and diaspora communities from strangers to neighbors. This space can allow us to interact with one another, empathize with their pain, hear their stories, and determine how to best meet the immediate and long-term need for their safety and security. Over the past year, we have witnessed powerful examples of communities welcoming those in need, such as opening doors and heart for those fleeing crisis in Afghanistan and Ukraine. However, it's not enough to only support those in need when media attention on the crisis is high. The act of welcoming the stranger and making them a member of the community requires long-term efforts through a whole of society approach. Not only with the collaborative efforts between civil society, governments, multilateral organizations, and other entities help to achieve Sustainable Development Goal 17, but it will also support in creating universal environment that welcome those in danger and promote conditions for peaceful coexistence. So, dear friends, today I call on us, I call on all of us today as faith actors and civil society organizations to serve as the leaders and role models in welcoming the stranger to our communities. The upcoming Welcoming Stranger Conference in June is going to be one of such mechanisms for us to identify actionable items for us to collaboratively advance such objectives. I am really delighted to join the conversations today and hear from my esteemed colleagues on how we as the interfaith community can continue to serve in the spirit of our traditions to ensure the safety and security of our brothers and sisters around the world. Thank you so much, and back to you, Dr. Reverend Sibin.
Thank you, Muhammad, for this very important opening remarks and just to prepare our hearts. And also, I know that you are having a blessed time fasting as well. So this is an important season that we are gathered together.
Thank you.
So once again, thank you for your comments. Now, for today, we have decided to use a conversational approach in the way that we will conduct this session. It is not meant to be very presentation focused, giving lectures, but rather with our speakers coming from different backgrounds, representing 3 different faith-based organizations with their own uniqueness. They will have a conversation facilitated well by my good friend and moderator, Anna Hjalm from A World of Neighbors, Church of Sweden, and she will moderate this conversation. And afterwards, if you have any questions, of course, we will draw it in the second part. So I'll pass the time to you, Anna, as we bring all the speakers in for this time. So over to you.
Thank you so much, Sibin. As the speakers in the panelists join us here in this session, we'll see them come in. I'll tell you that we have now 163 people in this conversation, and we're so happy to have you all. Here with us today, we have 3 panelists, all with different experiences of our commitment to welcoming the stranger and living as neighbors. My name is Anna Hjelm, and I'm the program director for A World of Neighbors, an initiative by Church of Sweden, an interreligious initiative by Church of Sweden for welcoming the stranger in Europe. Here with us today, we have Reverend Anne Burghardt, General Secretary for the Lutheran World Federation. And for those of you who are not super familiar with Lutheran World Federation, it's a global Christian community of 148 churches in the Lutheran tradition, representing over 77 million Christians in 99 countries. With us also, we have Mark Hetfield, President and Chief Executive Officer of HIAS. HIAS is a global organization that draws on Jewish values and history to provide vital services to refugees and asylum seekers of all nationalities, religions, and ethnic origins in 16 countries around the world, and that advocates for their fundamental rights. Welcome, Mark. We have also Wasim Ahmad, Chief Executive Officer of Islamic Relief Worldwide. Islamic Relief is a faith-inspired humanitarian aid and development agency working in over 45 countries to save and transform the lives of some of the world's most vulnerable people. Warmly welcome to you as well, Wasim. We are so happy to have you with us. We will jump straight into the conversation today, and we have agreed to use a conversational model for this afternoon. And I know that the three of you have one thing in common, or I'm sure you have many things in common, but for today's conversation, I'm especially interested in the fact that your organization are partnering in a joint pledge to the Global Refugee Forum, a pledge that aims to improve the understanding of shared responsibilities and the work being done by local faith actors around the world as we try to implement the global compacts on refugees. So this pledge has been very well received, and I would like to ask you, the first question goes to you, Wasim. Do tell us, what would you say, tell us a little bit about the pledge and why are Islamic Relief, HIAS and Lutheran World Federation partnering in this specific interfaith work?
Thank you so much, Anna, and it's a pleasure to be here and speaking about this this pledge. I think for us as Islamic Relief, as in any faith, as you have mentioned, one thing is common, probably many things we have in common. One thing common is faith, and I think in every faith is there that we have to welcome these strangers. These are not strangers, but as in Islam, refugees are our brothers, and we take them this teaching from our deen, our religion, and it's rooted in Quran. So the pledge that we are taking is actually inspired from our faith, and I believe that the world that we are unfortunately witnessing, where the refugees, number of refugees or displaced people are on the rise, and it's not just we have seen in Europe in recent weeks what's happening, and it's heartbreaking, but all across the globe it's been happening for centuries, I must say. And if I look back the Islamic history, it started when Islam spread in the world and Muslims started migrating, and they were getting refuge by Christians, the first migration. And we have seen recently in World War II even, where Muslim countries, they were giving refuge from people fleeing from violence, from different religion and different faith. So I believe this is the historic moment for us as a three organization to bring together our respective faiths and bring a message of peace and unity, to demonstrate that we are together in this three organization and other faiths as well in the world, I would say. As Sivan said, that this month is a really blessed month where several religions, they are celebrating this, not just Christian, Muslims, Jews, but also Sikh, Hindu. It's very sacred month. So I think this month not only reminds us that we have a lot in common, then we have probably little to divide us. So probably we have to focus what is most common among all of us. And I see this partnership, this pledge that we're going to make, these three stream organization will be very historical, and it will pave ways and open many doors and overcome a lot of prejudice that we have seen even in the country, in the UK where I'm sitting. There are prejudices when people come and enter in your streets, in your neighborhood. So I think faith is a force that can really help to overcome those prejudices.
Thank you so much. And what a start you set us out on. Mark, I turn to you and also asking about this pledge, and from your perspective, from HIAS perspective, what would you say is distinctive about this specific collaboration and interreligious collaboration in this pledge between both global faith organizations and the local faith actors that carry out the work?
Sure. Well, we have a special responsibility here because let's be honest, differences between faith groups or differences even within a faith group can be a cause of displacement. It's often one cause of displacement. But we know that together we can address displacement as faith groups. And we can certainly do it within our own faith group, but we are so much more powerful in doing it together between faith groups to show that we can overcome our differences and work on those things that unite us. And welcoming the stranger is certainly one of those things, and a very important thing. In fact, for the Jewish faith, the commandment to welcome the stranger is repeated in different iterations, no less than 36 times in the Torah, which is more often than any other commandment. And that's not because it's the most important commandment necessarily, but it's because it's the easiest one to forget and to disregard, to treat the other as the other, rather than to welcome him as him or herself, as thyself. So, it really is that, and we really are, this is not just a theoretical dialogue between faiths. Like one of the projects of which we are most proud here at HIAS is the partnership that we have with Islamic Relief in Greece to welcome asylum seekers from all over the world as two faith groups working together. And we recognize that as umbrella, really as international organizations that represent faith groups with a presence all over the world, we have the ability to respond first to crises, to refugee crises, to newcomers coming into our communities, because we have such a strong grassroots presence between all of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I turn to Anne as well. Building on this pledge, what is, in your experience, what is it that the faith-based organizations together as this or separately can do in conflict or conflict mitigation and in welcoming that other actors cannot do or are very limited in doing? I know you have been thinking about this some, so please share with us.
Many of the conflicts we see can actually be quite rightly attributed to differences of faith, or perhaps better to say, to situations where faith has been instrumentalized on behalf of political or power interests. However, due to this, it is also the language of faith which can bring about peace and reconciliation in a way which no other intervention really can. And this is recognized by the broader humanitarian community. I just yesterday returned from Uganda, where I was visiting our World Service Country program, which really made a deep impact on me. And I realized that often it is religious leaders who are there on the ground with refugees, with displaced people, and who are the ones to actually bring our message to the people we want to reach, whom we accompany, whom we support. Meaning that due to our already mentioned local to global and global to local structures, we are in a unique position to really reach out down to the grassroots and to be able to move things for the better. And the nice thing is that for all three organizations, the work that we do is actually deeply rooted in our faith. And without wanting to speak on behalf of others, I would just like to highlight something that unites all three Abrahamic traditions, which is the understanding that God is the creator of the whole world, or to put it differently in different language, the source of all being, and human beings are born with equal dignity. So accordingly, we are commanded to care for others, for our fellow human beings, without making any distinction between their ethnicity, their race, their gender, etc.
Thank you so much, Anne. Wasim or Mark, would you like to respond on the comment on each other or on what Anne just said?
Yeah. I want to, I think the thing Annie mentioned on first responder, I think is really something I have witnessed that I would like to share myself during the crisis that was unfolding in tsunami 2004-2005, where we have seen people who are the first responders who are really helping is from churches, is from mosques, is from synagogue. They were going out and helping and lending their hands to people who are internally displaced and who are looking for humanitarian assistance. I was serving in Sri Lanka, and I witnessed there great examples where all these international organizations, even likes of us, we were not there, but who were there? Those groups, those first responders were there. But sadly, what we see, I'm sure my fellow panelists Anne and Mark will agree with me, that the UN infrastructure or bilateral donors, unfortunately, they don't recognize all the time these first responders. Partly the reason is that they see this, they are probably a risk in terms of their institutional capacity to really comply with the stringent guidelines of giving grants or setting up partnership. So we miss out those first responders, unfortunately. And what happens is that we are not able to really strengthen their responses, and they cannot bring the impact that we would like them to do. I know that localization is becoming a trend and is a buzzword in the third sector. But I think when I ask questions, some of bilateral donors and international organizations, so what are you doing to really empower those first responders? You will not be there, I will not be there, they will be there. They'll be there and they will have a following in the community more than anybody else. So I think the partnership that we have, I think we can really harness that potential of first responders and really help them to come up and make sure that the institutional capacity is strengthened. Islamic Relief has embarked on a program in Asia and now is worldwide to strengthen the capacity of those first responders. So we can help them to really tick this box in terms of their satisfying the regulators in America and in Europe. And I think we have to do it. And this is the time for us to do it. We have seen in Ukraine, and we have seen how churches are helping. And one of my colleagues was telling me on the Polish border, there were people with a flag that if you can relate your religion or faith, please approach us. And not only that, it is not just for faith, it's for people with no faith. So I think they are there. There's no European Union or other funders or bilateral donors are there. People with faith, they're just there and saying that, you can come to us and we can help you. That's the spirit that we need to refresh again in this time where we need to come together. And I like what Mark said, that we need to really show the picture, what really brings us together, not little things that divide us. And I think that will take the message out loud and clear all across the globe. Over to you, Anna. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wasim. I just felt like, can we just prolong this session with a few hours? I think there are so many things to unpack here. But Mark, I give the floor to you, and maybe you can share something about this, especially the first responders remark that Wasim just brought up, because I know HIAS is working very much as first responders, not least in the situation in Ukraine at the moment.
Right. Yes, I'll say a couple things about that to add to what Wasim said without repeating it. And that is, Wasim talked about faith groups being the first responders, which is absolutely true. But the important thing to emphasize is they're also the last responders, right? So the faith groups are there before the international NGOs come in, and they stay there after the international NGOs leave. And that is when it is the most delicate period, right? That is the most important time. When the international community moves on to the next crisis, the faith groups are still there, the grassroots are still there to try to, continue building this peace and continue welcoming newcomers within their community. That's hard work, and it's work that faith groups are uniquely positioned to do. And the other thing I will say, a special challenge that the Jewish community has, that we have as a Jewish faith responder, is we're very small, right? There are only 15 million Jews in the entire world. About 85% of them live in 2 countries. So we are not we don't have a large presence all over the world to necessarily be those first responders. So in HIAS's, as the Jewish refugee agency, we have to work with local communities in a faith-sensitive way. And we think that's our special strength, that because we are faith-based, we understand the importance of faith. We understand the importance of faith-based communities, and we have a responsibility to work with other faith-based communities and to understand the importance of faith to people who are fleeing. Because as Jews, we understand that when we were chased out of country after country, time after time, century after century, the only thing we were able to bring with us was our faith tradition and our holy scriptures. You know, everything else was taken away from us. But those things are what helped us survive displacement. Those are what helped us rebuild community, displacement after displacement. And we understand that this isn't unique to the Jewish people. This is true for any faith group. It's a very important part of surviving displacement and of rebuilding community no matter where you are. And I think as faith groups, that's a special thing that we can understand and that we need to build into our own programming. And I would say, try to promote other actors doing the same.
Thank you so much. And as you said, I think the point of being the first responders in many cases, but also very much the last responders, those staying around as maybe the media attention or the acute disaster is over. So this is, of course, hard work for all welcoming and receiving communities and for the people on the move, of course. So maybe one of my other questions would be what gives you strength, what inspires your organization, and if I turn to Anne first, what inspires Lutheran World Federation to do the work you do with receiving communities and with people on the ground?
Well, thanks a lot, Anna. When it comes to more specifically, let's say, Christian tradition, we see, of course, in the story of Jesus, a story of welcome, of inclusion. And from him, we also have heard the double commandment of love. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. And you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Neighbor meaning each and every human being. Then further, when it comes to supporting and helping the neighbor, we have a very clear instruction, again in the Bible, from Jesus, who told his followers that when they fed the hungry, gave drink to the thirsty, welcomed the stranger, clothed the naked, and visited the sick and those in prison, they were doing it to him. So when they failed to do those things, they failed to serve him. And also Martin Luther always used to emphasize that through being liberated by God's grace from looking at ourselves only, we are free to turn our eyes to the neighbors and their needs. Last but not least, I would like to add that Jesus himself was a Jew and had thus a very strong passion for justice and concern for the stranger found in the Hebrew Bible. In the Hebrew Bible, there is a strong call to welcome the stranger. And in the New Testament, we are reminded of the need to show hospitality to the strangers and refugees. So one of the founding impulses for the LWF actually was the need to take care of the refugees after World War II. And we have remained true to this calling until today. So the member churches of the LWF remain committed to promoting human rights, peace and reconciliation, and to alleviating human suffering, addressing the root causes of social, economic, and gender justice. And the Communion Office just sees its task in accompanying and supporting our member churches in this involvement. And World Service can, in a certain sense, be seen as our humanitarian arm in doing all of that.
Thank you so much. And Mark, you have been touching upon this and what inspires the Jewish community and HIAS to work with refugees and migrants and welcoming communities. But could you maybe give us a little bit more thinking around what inspires you personally? What keeps you committed when the going gets tough?
Sure, and there's a lot of sources of inspiration. As I said, it's 36 times in the Torah, and that's something we always go to. And what's truly amazing is that was written thousands of years ago, right? And yet it speaks to the Jewish experience and the human experience in the 20th century, and tragically in the 21st century as well, right? The whole experience of exodus, of displacement, of rebuilding community, of the importance of welcoming the strangers, welcoming people from outside of your community. It's something that sadly keeps getting repeated in history. And in our sacred book, we have basically a guide on how to address it. And the most important thing is the reminder that so many of us have spoken about, is that all of us are created in the image of God. All of us are equal in terms of dignity, and we have an obligation to welcome the stranger as well as people from within our own community. And so it's a constant source of inspiration. It's sad that we have to keep going to it because the world continues to be in desperate need of repair. But it's inspiring because we know that there are so many millions of us who are committed to repairing the world, who realize that we're going to be part of the problem if we're not part of the solution. And so our faith tradition, our Torah, are basically a call to action and a guide for how to address those crises and how to repair the world.
Thank you so much. And I love the comment on we are many committed to repairing the world. And even if we just do a little bit of reparation where we stand, that's part of the solution as well. So thank you so much. And I turn to Wasim. We know that the Quran speaks beautifully about celebrating what makes us the same and what makes us different. And what other teachings or guides does your organization draw on, or what inspires your community to welcoming the stranger and living as neighbors, the next step of inclusion?
I think you asked this question, Anna, earlier, like, okay, what is for us that three organizations are coming together? I think Mark and Annie clearly said this, that what in Bible, what in Torah about welcoming people who are oppressed, and we all are one created as human being. We are equal, our dignity and everything. I think in Quran and in Islam we say auzu billah. Auzu billah in Quran in many times. It says that I take refuge in God from Satan, from oppressor. So in our religion in Islam, where it states to an extent that poor and oppressed, they have a right on our wealth. So when it's at that level that they have a right on our wealth, and we'll be asked about this right, if we think and put this under microscope, it means so much to us. So as a Muslim, we'll be asked about what we have done to someone who came and asking for refuge, asking for asylum, regardless of any faith. Whoever comes and knock on your door, that I'm running away from this oppression, from the atrocities, I need refuge. We have moral, first of all, without any faith, but for us as Muslim, it's a religious duty, is binding, that we have to give refuge. We have to protect families. We have to protect who are asking for help. We will be asked by Allah, our God, hereafter, what we did when we had this opportunity. So for us within Islamic Relief and Islamic faith community, this is the teaching that keeps us going, inspire us. Dr. Sivan talked about month of Ramadan. When we put food on the table and what we think about it, that we are blessed that we can have food and we can eat. People who are running away in Ukraine, in Syria, in Yemen, in Somalia, in Afghanistan, and all other parts of the world where people are running away rather from conflict or natural disaster or hunger. Hunger is on the rise. We have seen on the news now because of this conflict. So people are running away from hunger. They're looking for food. So this month for us as Muslims is inspiration. So I think that faith is, if I if I may say this, faith is the only factor that will bring in this inspiration. As Mark rightly said, that we are not just the first responders, but last responders, because when actually money runs out, I have seen example myself where people are selling their assets so that they can feed people who are they're giving refuge. I have seen this in Sudan in 2005, where people are running away from conflict and people were hosting them in their homes by selling goods every day, their assets, even little things as like the bike, the cycle, they're selling it. Why? Because they wanted to feed them. They feed them better than what they are giving to their children or they're feeding themselves.
That's really a beautiful and strong statement on humanity and how we can live together. Thank you so much. I also wanted to address a question to all of you, and this is a bit more maybe on the more difficult side of this topic. As the invitation for today spelled out, 85% of the world's refugees are living in developing countries and hosted in developing countries, and they are maybe very often just not talked about in media or in the kind of public debate. And as we have mentioned, as for us who are Europeans, of course, the Ukraine is very much top of mind for us these days, and we see horrible pictures coming out of there. So from your experience and from what you hear right now from people on the ground in your organizations and the voices that you hear within your organizations, what are the challenges and for the refugee response around the world today? What are really the most difficult parts of it and the most challenging parts of it in different parts of the world? And this could, of course, take a very extensive answer, but I give you a minute each to kind of speak on what is top of mind for you. I'll start with you, Mark, this time.
Whole minute. Yes, the problem is that no refugee crisis is being solved. Right. And they seem to go away, but they don't really go away. It's just each refugee crisis eclipses the one before it. So Ukraine isn't the new refugee crisis that's replaced Syria or Myanmar or Venezuela or Ethiopia or Sudan. It's simply, or Afghanistan. It simply eclipsed those crises, which are still raging. The international community is still not prioritizing resolution of these refugee crises, which is why we have the largest population in world history of displaced persons right now. So that is the biggest challenge. And again, that's why faith is so important, because there are faith actors in all of these places that can and must play a role in welcoming the stranger and are playing that role. But that is a horrible challenge. And I'll be honest too, is that the other challenge is that, we see double standards. We see refugees and this, we are so glad that Poland and Eastern Europe has opened up their borders to refugees fleeing Ukraine. But we also saw the weaponization of refugees by Belarus a couple of months ago, and a very different response in those countries. We saw a very different response in those countries to Syrian refugees coming in. But and right now we see a very different response along the southern border of the United States, where at the same time as millions of refugees are flowing into Eastern Europe from Ukraine, the United States is trying to impose restrictions to continue to keep refugees from the Northern Triangle of Central America out of our country, without seeing the contradiction there. And we're drawing hope from that, though, because for us, again, this is a reminder that anybody can be a refugee, right? And that's the important thing. Any one of us can be vulnerable, and we're hoping that that is a lesson learned from here. So hopefully it will lift all of our responses.
Thank you so much for a rich response in a very brief time span. Wasim, what is your thoughts on this? What is the main challenges?
Yeah, I think I agree with Mark. I think the scale we're talking about, is one after another, and this is, of course, is not helping in terms of resources and the efforts that all the actors are making. But I think one thing I would like to go back to my point that I mentioned about the first responders. We have seen in Europe when Syrian refugees were coming in, all the faith-based organizations were contacted by the host governments. They were listened to in a formal way, and they were given opportunity to respond to refugee needs. And similarly, Ukraine crisis, as we have seen, at least in the UK, and during Afghanistan, when refugees were coming in for protection in this country, in UK, for example, Islamic Relief has been providing support, and we were asked by local councils, because obviously majority of them were Muslims, to really address their faith needs and provide them this facility. They're asking for it in terms of practicing their faith. But one thing is missing globally that we don't see in other countries in the South, where either international organization or government, they make sustained efforts to involve faith groups. Faith groups, local faith groups, most of the time are considered risky actors in terms of really involving them. Either is we're talking about Christian, Muslim, Hindu, Sikh, Jews, always consider that we don't want to involve them faith when it comes to responding to refugee crisis. We have seen in Horn of Africa, we have seen in Afghanistan crisis, we have also seen in Syria when we're talking about refugees in Turkey and other parts of surrounding Syria. I think we need to make sustained effort that the faith has a role to play. And I think I plead to United Nations, UN agencies, to make it not just a choice, but it's a compulsory thing. When you are responding to a crisis, faith groups in that country must be coordinated and organized and listened to, because they are the first and last responder. Sorry, Mark, taking your word on this. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think bringing an experience from the conversations within the World of Neighbors network, many faith actors or the first responders, as you put it, are also feeling that they are seen as doers, not as thinkers. So not included in conversations on analysis on the situation and possible solutions. So thank you for that remark. And Anne, what do you and what do Lutheran World Federation see as the main challenges at the moment?
Thank you. Well, I very much agree with both what Mark and Wasim were saying. And when it comes now currently to the war in Ukraine, it is clear that it will have an immense impact on the funding of refugee response all around the world. Also, when it comes to issues such as shortage of wheat, which has been provided by Ukraine in large numbers up to now. And we are very glad to be a global communion, so that we are constantly reminded of all the other crises and all the other wars still going on worldwide. So that when I visited Africa now for 2 weeks, it wasn't just by chance, but it was also really to show that we have not forgotten about other regions in the world where conflicts are ongoing and where actually the majority of refugees worldwide is being hosted currently. Not diminishing at all by that the fact that Ukraine is really going through the major crisis when it comes to refugee crisis in our current times. So basically, shortage of funding is definitely one of the major problems, but I believe another problem is the sustainability of our response sometimes when it comes to empowering displaced persons and empowering refugees in, so to say, taking over their future. Because what I often hear from my colleagues who work on the ground is that over a period of time, if the crisis lasts too long, people have been already born in refugee camps, it is very easy to develop a dependency syndrome. So how to overcome that, how to equip people with skills that will enable them to take their future into their own hands, how to give them some really practical skills to lead their lives. And what I saw in Uganda in past week was really encouraging in seeing how girls and women who had gone through gender-based violence were acquiring new skills which enabled them to set up small businesses, how farmers were instructed how to advance agriculture, etc. I believe we really need to invest into this kind of capacity building. And I also would like to once again emphasize the role of religious leaders, because we can organize all sorts of workshops when it comes to raising awareness about harmful cultural practices, for instance. But as long as this is not supported by the religious leaders on the ground, this understanding, it will be very difficult to reach our aims.
Thank you so much, and thank you for sharing your worries and your what you see as challenges here. And as we are coming towards an end for this conversation, I still would like to give you the chance to also speak to the hope. I mean, this collaboration between Islamic Relief, LWF, and HIAS is for sure a sign of hope for many of us on how to move forward. But if I give you the floor to say something about what kind of signs of hope do you see from where you stand, and what potential steps forward can we take to at least keep on mending the world, keep on repairing the world, and trying to address the crisis for refugees and migrants globally. Anne, would you like to start?
Well, at the height of a crisis, faiths and Christian confessions put aside their differences to work together for a common cause. So, for example, in the strip of land between the Ukrainian and Slovak border, an interfaith tent was established to provide emergency assistance to cold, weary, and vulnerable women and children. So in these contexts, there is no mention of faith or religion at all. The passages from so many faiths in the Welcoming the Stranger statement, passages which show that there is more that unites than divides us, come to life in a situation like that. I was very moved by something that I just recently heard from a colleague that had visited Warsaw in order to see how to set up our refugee response there for the Ukrainian refugees. He said that the local pastor in the congregation on Sunday had said in his sermon, just a few days after the war had begun, I am going to ask you to do something very difficult. I am asking you to forgive and to love. It's in these moments that faith leaders really step up and set the tone of peace. So I believe if we equip our church leaders, our faith leaders, community leaders, with this message of peace and reconciliation, we can really bring back some hope to these communities that are so severely affected at the moment. And secondly, I trust that our three organizations can really draw from each other's strengths and build up on it, so that we don't need to duplicate everything, but we can really see where to support each other, where to add to each other's strengths. So I believe that there is a lot that can be reached if we really hold together and reflect jointly how to improve the situation on the ground.
Thank you so much. And I give the slot for speaking on hope to you, Wasim. What do you see, and what do Islamic Relief see?
I think my colleague Annie has said all, and I think I completely support what Annie said, and we are committed, and the reason why three organizations are coming together. I believe as an organization with Operation Humanitarian and Development programs that we have in dozens of countries, and I think it's a strength, as Annie said. And through our global partnership, I believe in discourse, promoting greater diversity. I think this is one of the things that I think that we need to really be proud of. And faith literacy and shared spiritual value, I think this is very important. Sharing spiritual values that are in common, and really supporting humanity, which is God's creation. As Mark said, that we all are created as one, God's creation, and really make sure that we are not bringing race, religion, or creed while we're doing so. But crucially, however, we are also working hard to put these values into practice alongside our principal humanitarian imperative. I think we have seen that before. It's 10 years partnership with Lutheran World Federation and Islamic Relief, and with the HIAS, I think number of years, I know our affiliate in US, they are closely involved with HIAS, and reason why 3 organizations, we are stepping ahead. So it shows that the experience that we started in our little lab, either with LWF, and I have this honor that I was there when the first strategic agreement was signed with LWF, and I'm proud to see that where we are. But I must say that road is miles long, and what we have covered is little. The crisis that we have seen and the scale that is growing. And I think the last thing I would like to say that we must focus, and we are 3 organizations, I think we are giving this example to the world that there is a lot in common in faiths. And again, I'm repeating it because I've seen some of the questions coming through, that faith is a force that can bring us together. Don't look at where the faith is dividing communities. I think this partnership will go a long way to give this message of hope to all the people, all the oppressed people, that we are together one as human, to help them, to give them refuge, and also raise awareness. I think raising awareness is very important, and doing advocacy at a global level so that it's been recognized by international organizations, particularly UN. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wasim. And I think the image of a long way to go stays with us, but really this is a very interesting and very important step. So, Mark, what are your thoughts on the hope that you see from your perspective?
Well, where I see some real progress and hope is that I think for too many decades, the international community, the international NGOs have been afraid to even acknowledge the role that faith plays, both in displacement and in resolving displacement, by creating an atmosphere of welcome into communities. And I think now we're at a stage where we realize we cannot ignore faith. If faith is important to people who are being displaced, it has to be important to us in terms of working with them to find solutions. We have to acknowledge their faith, and we can't do that as an individual Jewish group, or as an individual Catholic group, or Lutheran group, or Muslim group, or Buddhist group. We have to do it together because of the diversity of faiths. And we need to have a unified commitment to faith-sensitive solutions, both in communities that are welcoming asylum seekers and in working with those asylum seekers themselves. And I see that progress.
Thank you so much. So happy to hear it. And as we come close to the end, we still have a few questions from the chat box, and I wanted to bring one of them to you, to all the 3 of you. Igor asks for examples of the most successful interfaith collaborations that you know of, or that you can tell us about. Wasim, do you want to start? Do you have something on top of mind?
There's too many, so I don't know which one to pick from. I think I must say most recent one was in Afghanistan during pandemic with the project that we did with Christian Aid, and this is the most recent. So I'm saying that I think it's a great example where Islamic Relief and Christian Aid came together and deliver a project to communities in Afghanistan to protect them from pandemic and give them this message. Then when it comes to humanity, either as Christian or Muslim, we are together. We are here to help you. And I think giving this message in a community in Afghanistan, to me, is something quite meaningful, and really bringing this closer, the values that we carry as a faith group and the values enshrined in humanitarian principle. So that's one example, very briefly, I will cite. And I don't want to cite example from our partnership with HIAS and LWF because it's there. And then I think we are proud of all these examples. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Mark, what comes to mind when you hear Igor's question?
No, a lot. And I also say it's important, it's rather than talking about these, great international faith collaborations, the important ones are the ones that are actually happening on the ground, right, in local communities. That's where we're really making a difference. And so the one that comes to mind was really the first one that raised HIAS's consciousness about this issue was our intervention in Chad when the Darfuris started seeking refuge there in the early 2000s. And many of them had fled. While they were fleeing, they lost loved ones, they lost family member, and they had to keep fleeing. They didn't have any opportunity to bury them, to mourn them in a way that respected their faith tradition. And so when HIAS started there, realizing that was job one, was making sure that we worked with them in ways consistent with their faith tradition to mourn their loss and to try to move on from that. And we couldn't do that ourselves. So we had to work with faith leaders. We had to work with imams to make sure that we could affect that. And that was really what woke us up to the importance of not just being faith-based, because it's not about us. We have to be faith-sensitive, because it really is about the people that we're working with.
Thank you so much. What an inspiration. And Anne, I turn to you. Give you the last words on this. What comes to mind for you?
Thanks a lot. It was very powerful what Mark just mentioned. I do agree that the best practices are often to be found on the ground, where we even don't know where exactly they happen and who is carrying them out. But one thing that comes to my mind is how in, I believe, 2015, LWF and Islamic Relief Worldwide jointly provided shelter for over 10,000 affected people after the earthquakes in Nepal, which was then in 14 worst affected areas following this earthquake. And then secondly, I would actually also like to draw attention to the joint efforts on advocacy level, because one thing is the actual cooperation in practical sense, but in implementing the response. But I believe as important is actually the joint advocacy. So in 2018, LWF and Islamic Relief Worldwide, with other partners, including HIAS, Church of Sweden, World Vision, the UNHCR, and the International Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, published guidance which aimed at helping humanitarian agencies to do more to attune the work they do to the faith and background of people affected by conflict, disaster, and displacement. So that is also one aspect of our joint activity that I believe is worthwhile mentioning. Thanks.
Thank you so much, all of you. This has been a very blessed and rich conversation, rich both in thoughts, I think, and in inspiration for the coming work that we will do together. So thank you, Anne from LWF. Thank you, Wasim from Islamic Relief Worldwide. And thank you, Mark from HIAS. And with this, I give the word to Peter Munene from the Faith to Action Network for closing remarks. And I know this must be a challenging topic or a challenging thing, Peter, to be able to wrap up this very rich session, but thank you for doing it.
Thank you very much, Anna. It is indeed a challenging task to try to wrap up when so rich a discussion has been done for the last one hour. But allow me to attempt, and I want to try and attempt from in the closing remarks or closing by starting from where some of the discussions were ending, and I want to go with what was said previously, that every crisis overshadows existing crises. That the current crisis we have overshadows what already exists. Not that the others go away, but they remain, but they are overshadowed by the current one. And the tendency is always to focus on the very current one and more or less on the ones that have been in existence. And the it's really sad that often the faith community, which is deeply rooted in communities, which has structures all the way to, as we always say, the grassroots, is left out, both in terms of capacity, but also in terms of support to be able to do the work that they have done very well, from being the first responders to being the last responders, and not just the last responders, but the ones who remain in those communities, even when others have moved on to the new crisis that has emerged. And this is a call really for a call to action for the international community, the UN agencies, that you cannot continue considering the faith community as the risk, because really that's where the reservoir for support for those that are suffering and those that are facing crisis, those that are displaced, those that are on the move to try to look for refuge. That's the reservoir of support for those communities, and we cannot operate from a UN as the globe by having double standards, where we have those that are considered to be the ones that can get support, and those whose capacities and whose standards are different because they have never been built, then are considered to be a risk. Yet, when the crisis happens, they are the ones who respond and provide the greatest level of support at that particular moment, even if that support is just providing the very, very basics that they can afford at that particular moment. I want to say that the international community here has a responsibility. The governments of the world have a responsibility to not only recognize the role the faith community plays, but equally to support them and build their capacity to be able to even respond better if we want to build resilience in the way we are able to respond to crisis globally. There is an interesting thing that has come on board, and I think this is where some misconception might be, that yes, the faith community might not have policies and procedures and standards that are already written down. But you know, they have their own standard, they have their own principles, they have their own policies, and those are really basically the scriptures that guide them into acting. So they are not looking for a policy, referring to a specific policy. Those things are already in them because the scriptures, the different scriptures that have been mentioned in this particular discussion today, are already forming the basis on which the faith community responds to crisis. And this needs to be recognized, that it is inbuilt, it is there, it is already scriptural for them to be able to respond. They are not looking at reading a document so that they can know how to respond to an issue. They already know that it is upon them. It is a requirement. It is a call for them that they should respond when people are facing crisis. I want to thank the speakers a lot, but also recognize that, as we did mention, or as it was mentioned by Mark and also by Anne and by Wasem, that sometimes the faith community can also be the source of conflict, can also be the source of displacement. But what is very, very important is that the faith community also is the greatest source for mitigating, and the greatest resource for mitigating crisis. And it is there when the crisis happens, after the crisis has other agencies have gone, and actually continues to build on building a resilience in the communities that are hosting those that are strangers, those that then become neighbors. And just like Anne was saying, I also came back and from Uganda yesterday. And one of the things that that was being shared was by the Uganda Joint Christian Council, which is made up of 3 major Christian denominations: the Catholic, the Anglican, and the Orthodox. And they were talking about the crisis that has been there in Yumbe, which has been a host community for a lot of refugees from different countries in that area. And one of the things that they were responding to is the depletion of a local resource, a forest called Bidibindi. And they had gone to look at what are the alternatives that can be built in this community to be able to reclaim that land where the forest has been depleted, because the refugees who went there and who have been hosted there did not have any other source of power. They were using, they have been cutting trees from this forest. Now it is completely depleted because they need to be able to, they need a source of power to cook. So it is the faith community, after others have left, that is still looking at how do we address even the climate effects that have come on board because of this particular crisis. So I want to thank everyone and say that the faith community is actually a reservoir that needs to be recognized, and that needs capacity for it to be able to respond to crises that are emerging, crises that are ongoing, but equally crises that the effects of the crisis that have happened over time. Thank you so much. And I want to call upon then Melanie to be able to give the closing remarks.
Thank you, Peter. Hi, everybody. I'm Melanie Douglas, and I'm HIAS's Vice President for Humanitarian Partnerships Policy and Practice. First and foremost, I want to extend thanks to the panelists, speakers, and moderator for joining us today. Mohammed, Wasim, Anne, Mark, Anna, and Peter, you are all so very busy, and we cannot say thank you enough for making the time to join us to share your experiences about how you and each of your respective agencies are putting our shared values into practice to respond to those who have been forced to flee their homes in search of protection. To the participants on the front lines of humanitarian responses, who are not only the first to respond, but also the ones who are staying and delivering in the most challenging of circumstances, we thank you for joining us. To the participants who are out front advocating or are behind the scenes supporting operations, or to those of you who are working to promote welcome and integration with a faith-sensitive lens within your communities on behalf of governments, whatever your role in responding to the needs and rights of the most vulnerable, we thank you for taking the time to engage with us today in this most important conversation. Last but not least, to Sivan, Kate, and Atala, I cannot thank you enough for your tireless work in initiating and executing the Welcoming the Stranger Pledge and extending such a warm welcome to HIAS as we joined you in your efforts. I am humbled daily by your service and commitment. I think I can speak for all of our organizations hosting this event today in saying that we look forward to engaging with you, all who have joined us today in other fora or in the field, to hear more about your experiences welcoming strangers and helping others to welcome them. As Anne said, let us draw from each other's strengths and work alongside each other to promote more and deeper discourse, partnership, diversity, faith sensitivity, and faith literacy, and shared spiritual values to protect and support the world's most vulnerable in new and protracted crises. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day wherever you are, and thank you again for your time.